So let's continue with Chapter 8 material. In Chapter 8, we just started talking about some basic terminology, why sport branding, the terms and definitions. We ended with a term called brand equity, and that's where I want to pick up. If we look at this class, it's based on this idea, and we mentioned it before, the 4 P's of the marketing mix. It's the basic understanding of a marketer's job. In other words, a marketer's job is to be involved, and sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, small organizations, you may do all of these. Other organizations, you just may have one. But the 4 P's of the marketing mix are really what we think about as marketers. So, product, price, place, and promotion. However, and that was traditionally started in the 1950s, was used extensively, and into today, we still see product, price, place, and promotion being the foundation of how we understand a marketer's job and the theories that come from that. However, what we now see is a transition to the 4 E's of brand equity. The 4 E's of brand equity is essentially how we look at branding in a postmodern culture. What we mean by this is these are areas in which sport brands are starting to look at how consumers interact. And so when we look at brand equity, many times this is very essential for us in the sport industry because of the experience. So I'm basically going to walk you through these 4 and give you examples. So the first one is emotions. Essentially, if somebody has an emotional connection with a brand, we're going to see that there's a higher value for that brand in the long run. And again, if you look at the definition of brand equity, it's the value that comes from brand attributes, the perceptions and attitudes toward the brand, and the outcomes from repeat brand use. And so if we can have an emotional connection in which they're associating positive things, feelings that come from experiences they've had with your brand, that these subjective opinions are positive, they feel like there's a premium of being a fan of that brand, then we know that we've been able to add to that value. I'll give you the example. One of my faculty members when I was in my master's and PhD always tells the story when talking about emotional connections. When he was a kid, he grew up in Tennessee, and when he was a kid, they would go to their local high school football game, which is a very small town. And when he would walk into the stadium, he remembers seeing on the ticketing booth that there were vines that were growing up this brick facade. When he walked up and his parents bought the ticket, he got the smell of popcorn coming from the concession stand. And so to this day, he says anytime he goes to an event that he smells popcorn, it reminds him of that experience. When he sees the old-fashioned type of ticketing booths that have vines coming up, it reminds him of those positive times. And so if we're able to do similar things with our brands, if people remember that, let's say we're a CrossFit gym, and the positive emotional experiences they've had, the associations, the feelings, the positive subjective opinions, and the premium they get from being a fan or being a participant in CrossFit gyms, we know that we're building the value of our brand. The second one is experiences. I want to tell you another story. I take students every now and then to sporting events, and one time I took students to the Houston Astros. My former boss when I was working for the Round Rock Express is the president at the time and still today. I don't know when you watch this video, but he is the president of the Astros, Reed Ryan. And Reed Ryan is the son of Nolan Ryan, and they are the ownership group of the Round Rock Express. Long story short, I invited a friend to come along. He had a kid. He and his wife have been Astros fans most of their life. They haven't been too diehard. Of course, he watches the games and roots for them. But he always tells this story. And I think I've heard it 4 or 5 times, and this only happened a year or 2 ago. He tried to take his kid to an Astros game with us. That night, there were terrible traffic. There was a plane accident on Highway 59 headed to Houston. There was traffic coming into Houston. There was a thunderstorm as he was coming in, trying to get out of his car. So he ended up being about 5 innings late. I think he got there in the middle of the 6th or into the 5th, something like that. And so he'd missed most of the game. He just wanted to get his kid to his first game. He walks in and he goes, "Jason, I'm just frustrated. I need to sit down and just watch the game." And I said, "Well, would it make it any better if I told you you'd be able to meet Reed Ryan?" And he goes, man, that would make my day. Just so happened Reed was down at the seat talking to some of my students. And so I introduced him to Reed Ryan. Reed told him, or I told Reed what his circumstance was and how he got here late. It's his kid's first game. And after that, Reed said, you know what, we want to take care of you. He sent one of his VPs down, brought down a package or two for his kid and for him, and then said, you know what, if you ever want to come back, your next game's on the Astros. He ended up giving him 8 tickets to the next game for his family in Houston to go to. It wasn't the next game, but it was a game a couple series later, really close to the field. That was an experience that Reed Ryan didn't have to do, that the Houston Astros didn't have to do. But to this day, it is the most memorable experience that he's ever had in baseball, because he basically was able to get royal treatment for his kid in his first game in a very bad situation. And to this day, and the reason I tell you this is, to this day, he has that positive memory. He tells that story to almost everybody I hear. And from that, he can have this experience that is unlike any other, which gets to the exclusivity part. So whether it's the feelings that come from a game, the smell, and part of this is the sound that comes from sporting events, so the senses, or the physical setting of the venue, all of these things have to do with the experience consumers have with the brand. If we're able to connect with them emotionally, provide experiences that are of high quality and memorable and make people want to tell stories, that guy's, he says to this day, he goes, because of that, I've always been a Astros fan. But because of that, I am now going to be a diehard fan the rest of my life, because of that one experience. That builds brand equity over time. Engagement. So this is a lot of what we start to see with technology. How do fans engage with our brand? Part of it has to do with the involvement with the team, involvement with the sport, and sometimes that comes with the governance structures of sport organizations. So take, for example, the European model in soccer. I'm not going to get too in-depth because it's not an international sport. But essentially they have a very strong grassroots marketing program where children start to play at club levels for the major league team. So essentially, if we did this in the United States, let's say in football, Pop Warner, you would be playing for the Houston Texans or the Dallas Cowboys and actually be in their organization and move your way up into a role where you can get a starting job on their main roster. Happens all the time in overtime in the European model of soccer. But the whole point is the more involved they get in the sport at the grassroots level, the more likely they are to become fans for life. You can have conversations with your consumers. And so this is where technology comes into play, and social media, and having real, authentic conversations and giving them the opportunity and ability to be social with the brand. It's no longer a atmosphere where you cannot engage with any celebrity. If you wanted to, you could send them messages on Facebook and Twitter. If you wanted to, you can engage with them digitally. And so in the era of what we used to see in brands is that you would typically buy a product, or let's say in sport, you'd go to a game, you might be able to get an autograph and see the main player play, the star player play. But now we have the ability to engage with those athletes, engage with that brand. That builds the value. So build the emotional connection, give them the experiences, and let them engage with our brand. The last one is exclusivity, giving them a unique, distinct experience that nobody else can do, and provide that avenue for a consumer to say, you know what, this is exactly what I want to do. This is exactly my team. This is my brand, and I'm going to support them through all. Many times people make decisions about their basic everyday lives, and we kind of talked about that earlier, but our basic everyday needs are starting to change. That was in chapter 1. Change from personal desires to discretionary spending. Part of it is because you've been able to create a distinct, unique position in the minds of consumers. So when we talk about the 4 E's of brand equity, they are very essential in trying to understand how we go about doing and understanding consumers and how they behave.